Good evening, everyone. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here tonight. What a wonderful room of familiar faces and maybe a few new friends. Is anyone here first time you've been to the Columbia Museum of Art? Any first-timers? Well, welcome, first-timers. And what I love is most of this room has been to this museum. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm Joelle Ryan Cook, and I'm the Deputy Director here at the museum. And I had the pleasure of working closely with Bobby Donaldson and his amazing teams from the Civil Rights Center at USC and Columbia 63 to bring to bear the Our Story Matters gallery down on Main Street here in the museum and their Intersections exhibition. About a year ago, the teams were working really hard to see what that exhibition could look like, and they opened that exhibition in August, and they have had over 12,000 people come through that space. I think we should give them a shout out and congratulations. I think that's really amazing. And this is the first big program that we've collaborated on, plenty of smaller things, but we're really excited to have them here because the mission of this art museum is to celebrate and spark powerful connections through art from around the corner and around the world. And this is one of those around the corner programs. I mean, you literally, that Intersections exhibition is about around the corner of downtown. And then we are going to celebrate an artist from South Carolina. So I just love this kind of evening, and I love that it's part of our mission to collaborate with such amazing partners. So I also do want to bring up, if you haven't seen the exhibitions in our temporary galleries downstairs, the exhibitions are going to be up until mid-May. We've got about 3 weeks more of these exhibitions, but there are two amazing photographers in this exhibition who are African-American photographers in those gallery spaces. One is some of the original works by Richard Samuel Roberts, who is a hometown favorite as a photographer of the 20s and 30s around the Black business district in Columbia, and it is part of the feature of the Intersections Our Story Matters gallery and the COLA 63 USC group's interpretation, but you can see some of the images in our interior live show, as well as a really wonderful photographer from the 1980s named Daryl Ellis, who is an unsung, beautiful talent that unfortunately died in the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. But his work is unbelievable. It is moving. It is relevant today. So I really invite all of you to get to see that before those exhibitions close I think it's May 12th is the last day. Maybe a good day to celebrate Mother's Day and come experience really good work in the museum. So I also want to invite you to think about membership here at the museum so you can keep supporting programs like this and those exhibitions as well. So we do have a membership table here tonight, and so see if you can explore that. We appreciate it. I'd want to do a quick plug for a major grant that we just got. This summer, we are going to be able to offer to all South Carolinians during the regular public hours free admission to this museum thanks to an Art Bridges Foundation grant. So that is going to be all summer long, Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day during the regular public hours, and we are ramping up our daily activities. So we are excited. Please come back, bring your families, and enjoy us all summer long. And then with that, I want to talk about tonight's event. Tonight's event has a couple of components to it, but I am just welcoming you before we get to watch an excerpt of the documentary, The World of Cecil. Now, this is only an excerpt. So SCE TV produced this documentary, and I think Beryl Darkers is in the house somewhere. I'm kind of blinded here. Oh, she's back here. So this is a project she worked on, and if you are a member of ETV and give to ETV, you can, through Passport, find this video and stream it. So you can see the whole documentary, but we're going to go ahead and give you an excerpt of it today. And then with that, there's going to be a panel discussion afterwards that features Cecil Williams, Claudia Smith Brinson, and Beryl is going to speak, and then Dr. Frank Martin is going to moderate that. So don't leave us when the small excerpt is done. And with that, we're going to go ahead and introduce the film. The World of Cecil is a documentary about the life of renowned civil rights photographer Cecil J. Williams of Orangeburg. Using Williams' photographs as an impetus, the programs explore many of the less heralded South Carolina events, which Williams believes to be not only significant, but pivotal to the national civil rights movement. Along the way, we learn much about this multi-talented man of many interests and pursuits. So with that, we're going to go ahead and watch the excerpts. Thank you.
The reason the photographic legacy is so important is the lesson of the movement. Medgar Evers lives through his photographs. Martin Luther King Jr. lives through his photographs. Without the photographer, it never happened. So without Cecil, there is no legacy for the movement because the legacy resides in here.
There was a network of black press in, I think, as many as 16 cities. And we knew that when a good photographer was there and took a good picture, it sent the message all over the world.
If Cecil had not had his camera, people would be making the case that nothing ever happened in South Carolina, and we skipped our way merrily through the civil rights movement, whistling as we went, and everybody lived happily ever after. Cecil's photographs are testimony that it didn't happen that way.
Cecil, I think, is not only his role as a photographer, as a chronicler. I don't think it's just the importance to the state of South Carolina. I honestly think it's important at the national level in terms of talking about civil rights.
I would characterize the achievements of C.J. Williams, if I were to put it in a single word, it would be innovation.
He has been the teacher we've all needed.
Cecil has so many gifts, and I think that we may think of him only as a civil rights photographer, and that's erroneous.
He is an architect. He's also an inventor.
I think of him as an unobtrusive historian.
He was cutting edge.
When he sits and think about things, he can make it happen. So I would say, feed a genius.
Cecil J. Williams was the second son born to Cecil Leroy and Ethel Lillian Williams in the small southern town of Orangeburg, South Carolina. He was born November 26, 1937, at a time when Jim Crow was the law of the land. Cecil grew up in a happy household that also included the favorite cousin, Maudel.
We grew up on 3 Quick Street. In that house was my grandmother, my Aunt Ethel, my Uncle Cecil, their son Alfred, we call Al, and our cousin, the youngest, Cecil, we call CJ. One of the first things I remembered about CJ, I just said he was just sort of born smart. My grandmother was a school teacher, so she collected spools from some of the tailors, and we would have a math session almost every day. She would ask me a question. Maudel, what is something plus something? Or what is something times 2? And before I could think it, CJ would say the answer. I said, is your name Maudel? He said, no, but you're taking too long to answer.
Years later, his sister Brenda joined the clan.
My mother said she thought she had cancer when she found out she was pregnant with me. And she was half right because I was born June 22nd, so I am a Cancer. CJ was 15 and he'd been the baby for the youngest and the baby for a long time. And so I'm told he wasn't especially all that pleased, but he got over it.
Cecil's father was a successful tailor with a predominantly white clientele. His mother was a dedicated educator, teaching at the elementary, high school, and college levels.
My first camera at 9 years old, given to me by my brother, it was like a magic box. It enabled me to, you might say, draw faster because I loved to sketch as a child. So I was really, really happy that he passed the camera on to me, a Kodak Baby Brownie, $2.50 from Sears Roebuck.
Receiving that Kodak Brownie proved to be a turning point in Cecil's life. He found his passion.
When I was 12 years old, a cousin of mine, Dr. Charles Thomas, asked me to photograph a wedding for a friend of his who was getting married. I made $35, and I think the realization that I could make $35 and only have to spend maybe $5 worth of material, I think that really bit me pretty well, and I felt that this was going to be my profession. I wanted to be a photographer.
His first dark room was that bathroom.
It was after my brother left the family household, traveled to New York to pursue his musical career, that I really was able to set up a darkroom at the house.
He used the bathtub as his developing tank. And the rule was anytime CJ has his developing water in the tub, you cannot use the tub. So we had to go back to washing up from the basin. But we tolerated that.
Cecil and his friends enjoyed a relatively carefree youth. It was a fairly insulated environment. Nevertheless, it was a world circumscribed by segregation, a fact not lost on the astute young Mr. Williams. At age 13, the budding photographer's awareness of social issues was awakened. His photos found their way onto the pages of Jet magazine, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore Afro-American, and other Black publications. And by age 14, he was regularly sending pictures to many national news outlets. At age 14, he also acquired a measure of independence. Cecil got his driver's license. In spite of his burgeoning photo business, Cecil found time to pursue other things. He was keenly interested in comic books. He enjoyed creating models and designing cars. His other love was playing tennis. Cecil made constant use of the courts at nearby South Carolina State College. In 1950, he served as a ball boy for Althea Gibson when the American Tennis Association held its national tournament in Orangeburg. Developing into quite the tennis player, Cecil entered tournaments in other states and actually had the opportunity to play against Arthur Ashe. Robert Howard, the principal of Wilkinson High School, was himself a photography buff. He encouraged Cecil's interest, allowing the young man to use the school's photography equipment. Howard also introduced Cecil to his good friend E.C. Jones, a Sumter photographer who contracted with the local colleges to do their yearbooks and cover special events. Through Jones, Cecil would soon be enmeshed in the world of civil rights. Williams and his camera documented other aspects of Black life, from the mundane to the magnificent.
Cecil was a frustrated architect. I think it was his desire probably to go to some place like Clemson and study architecture, but because of his race, he wasn't able to do it.
I think Cecil's non-civil rights work, or work outside of civil rights activism and photojournalism, is important as an instruction as to what one can do when one wants to. He is truly an inspiration. When he was told no, he went and taught himself.
Three-dimensional blocks like these are helps to
formulate design concepts. The shadow and the blocks that are formed by them helps you come up with very interesting angles. So this very set of blocks, helped me to design the present Civil Rights Museum.
But Cecil is a very smart man, very intelligent, and probably self-taught in so many ways. And Cecil always had interesting houses, very modern houses that he designed.
This is a house I designed in about 1975. It has solar energy features, and it was one of the houses that I really put my heart and soul and mind into. This house was featured in Ebony magazine, and that made it known all over the country. So we got telephone calls, correspondence, and it was considered nationally as a house that really moved forward things that could be done in not only solar energy, but house design as well. I had almost everything that a person could ask for. In addition to having a living quarters, I also had a dark room and everything connected to photography that a person could want.
The fact that Cecil designed a solar type house does not surprise me, because Cecil was a person who was futuristic. He thought beyond the time and place where he was always looking forward, always willing to be innovative and bold. And he was very comfortable doing that.
So when Cecil was interested in something, he figured out how to do it, and he did it. And I find that very interesting about Cecil, that he's a person who has so many different skills and so many interests that he can fulfill with the skills that he builds.
All of my life, since 9 years old, even before picking up a camera, I was attracted by art. But I could not draw as well as I wanted to. And I think the photography and a camera led me to really being more intrigued with what you could do with a camera and just pressing a button.
When I came to Claflin, Cecil was just around because I think at the time he was finishing high school, I'm ahead of him. And he always came around. He had a little Brownie camera that he took pictures. And I became aware of him because he just kind of floated along, and he was younger than most of the college students there. I didn't know that later on we'd become friends.
I guess I'm creative. I go after goals that really demand a lot of creativity. I was once interested in becoming an architect. After my scribbles on paper weren't very successful, and I could find I was able to do them better with a camera. But I was always interested in architecture, and I started sketching cars and houses and things like that.
Cecil Williams, the artist, I picked up on this when I first started working with him. He would send me somewhere, and he says, okay, let me show you how you get there. He would not give me directions, would not tell me. He would have to draw it out. And he would actually draw the lines. And when you turn on Gervais Street and you make a left on Huger Street, and then you go here, you'll see a block, and he has to draw the house. So art is in his blood.
Cecil was in photography, but Cecil was also an artist. And I think our friendship came about because we were both taught by Arthur Rose. And because we were taught by Arthur Rose, we kind of spoke the same language. He knew things that I would be saying before I say them, because he knew that I learned what I learned from Arthur Rose, and he learned what he learned from Arthur Rose. He was a photographer, and of course, he did dabble in architecture. And I think Cecil epitomizes what Rose wanted all of us to do, is not to just stay in one medium. Arthur Rose painted, and he was a sculptor. Cecil did photographs, does painting, design houses.
Art is in him, but then he'll take it to the next level. He is somewhat perfected the Painter Showcase, which is a combination of art and photography. And he takes all genres of art and put them all together. And I remember we went to a bridal showcase in Columbia, and we had several of his pieces up there. And it amazed me that maybe there were 10, 15 photographers there, but Cecil was the only one that had artwork there. And guys kept coming up saying, now, wait a minute, tell me, is this a painting or is it a photograph? What is it? And we had to answer that question to the professionals all day long.
Making a drawing and illustration like this is basically the same way that I do a bridal portrait. And sometimes I leave it more photorealistic than other times. Sometimes I go real abstract with it. Often I would leave it very photorealistic, especially with brides who might want to be depicted as they really are and maybe enhanced.
Building on his early years as a contributor to various news periodicals, Williams soon began publishing his own newspapers and magazines.
Cecil has managed to paint with his lens. And of course, you can do other things too, like you can create brush strokes, and he's learned to do that. So he's taken photography and taken it to another level, I think.
Cecil has used his photographs as fodder for several coffee table books. 4 chronicle the civil rights movement. A 5th book, Painter's Showcase, deals with photographic art. Williams is also the subject of a new biography, Injustice in Focus. Claudia Smith Brinson was tapped as his co-author.
USC Press had been interested in him for quite a while, so I became sort of a facilitator with USC Press to try to get a book on Cecil's photography. And we decided we needed to tell the story of his life too, and I was game. And it's just been a wonderful opportunity to get to know Cecil better and to know civil rights history better, because he was there. You know, it's eyewitness. So Cecil is not just a civil rights icon. I think of him as a means to tell a deep story about what it was like to grow up identified as black in a white dominant and in a cruel culture when it came to race.
By his count, Williams has amassed hundreds of thousands of photographs, many of those capturing South Carolina's history, succumbing to the ravages of time, were on the verge of their stories being lost.
Ever since I've known him, he's come up with these ideas. So before there was a gimbal, before there was anything else, Cecil invented a shoulder harness for that camera, that Canon L, whatever. And I remember asking, how did you come up with this? He said, it was just a need for it.
Cecil always knew there should be more. And he very much wanted to find a space where these images could be on display for public education, for community engagement, and for research.
One day he came in like a whirlwind. He came in as though someone was behind him, and he just came and sat on the edge of my desk and he said, I'm gonna turn this building into a museum. He started out of pocket, just started to transform one room at a time, and now we have this large, beautiful museum that's attracting people from all across the country. It was born in his mind, in his heart, you know, and he wanted to share it with some other folk, but they were just not ready to march. And if you know Cecil, when he's ready to march, have your boots on, let's go.
When people hear about the Cecil Williams Civil Rights Museum, I want them to be excited. I want them to be excited enough to come and visit. I want them to be excited enough to really share what history they might have. Take about an hour and a half and walk around the historical material that I've gathered, and hopefully will be chronologically arranged, and you'll be able to take a walk back through the last 60 years of our history. I want this museum to really be a reminder that we will not repeat the negative history.
Orangeburg should have a museum. It's a lot of history here.
Going back about 30 years, I've been trying to establish a Civil Rights Museum because I believe that it is a period of history that needs to be recorded. South Carolina was one of the only states in the Deep South that did not have a Civil Rights Museum.
He's made me very proud doing this and doing it with his own resources.
He took it upon himself to create the space he always hoped someone else would develop.
Thankfully now, due to museums like mine, I'm hoping that South Carolina's history will forever have an impact on our society and people be remembered for the sacrifices they have made. The museum concept and its beginning really was easy for me to do. 36 years ago, the museum site, which was at one time my residence and at another time partially my residence and my studio, came about as a result of really having no other place and within my means and income to really put it. But it seemed to be very ideal, wherein the structure, facade, and the room, 3,600 square feet, was just really quite adequate. It was almost as if it was just something laying there waiting to be done, and it seemed to just come all together. Building the museum or renovating the museum, I guess would be a better word, was a little challenging. Thankfully, I had some good assistance, but we did not have to knock walls out, but there was quite a bit of renovation to make it look like a museum, to really fill the walls with photographs. So we started with the floor and just went to the ceiling, we went to the walls and changed the lighting. When there were things that were more challenging than my own efforts, then I had to call in electricians and plumbers and so forth. But mostly it's my work that's going into the what you see today. No one told me it would cost millions of dollars to do a museum. I certainly did not have that to invest, but I have invested what was available to me, and I'm almost there with that resource. The official name of the museum is the Cecil Williams Civil Rights Museum. Of course, the subtitle is The South Carolina Events That Changed America. I felt that this reflects the mission of this museum, what we're trying to do, to bring to South Carolina some of the events that really helped to make this country what it is. We were involved in many things that are unknown. In most history books don't recall them faithfully. Most people don't know about them, but we certainly did not want this era and this great period of bravery on the part of South Carolinians to go unrecognized.
We've actually never had a platform or a space that tells that story. So if you go to Jackson, Mississippi, there is a Civil Rights Museum. If you go to Montgomery and Birmingham and Selma, there are Civil Rights Museums. If you go to Washington, D.C., there's a National African American Museum. Well, until recently, we have not had spaces and institutions telling that story. And so now in small town Orangeburg, there is a space and a venue curated by Cecil Williams that tells that story. And in some respects, that museum is significant because it is now correcting a narrative. It is now amplifying stories that have been marginalized.
If you haven't been to CJ's museum in Orangeburg, I pray that you will get the opportunity so that you can recant and see what a struggle, lost, stolen, or strayed, that he has accomplished and found to preserve. It is really, really storytelling.
we here in South Carolina went from a period of what is called accommodation, which my parents and my grandparents endured, in facing rigid segregation, separation of the races by color and tradition. And when that period began to change, motivated by student involvement and many things here in South Carolina, I wanted to really recall these events. And the mission of the museum is not only to display, collect, and preserve the memories of these years, but also to reclaim our rightful place in civil rights history. So much about our history is unknown.
Cecil wanted to tell what Paul Harvey used to call the rest of the story. And so the only way he could do that is to do a museum where he could use his photographs to be his own curator, to tell that story. And so I expected this. I think this is what Cecil arrived at. When I say arrived at, I mean there's some things that you could go to and some things you can arrive at. I think Cecil's whole life of moving around, take photos, seeing the world, seeing what happened to Harvey Gantt, seeing all these things, he arrived at a place where he said, now it's time for me to tell the story with the photographs I have.
One of the things that that motivated me to reach this point was that starting this museum was not an overnight thing. For example, 26 years ago, I started on this journey, which has led me to today. I published a book called Freedom and Justice, because even then, I thought that South Carolina's history was largely ignored.
It's a simple idea, but no one thought of it. No one said, let's do it. And so now that he's started the Cecil Williams Civil Rights Museum, we're getting a lot of interest from people all around that, want to know, how did this come about? We have other museums across the state, but I don't think anyone else has that kind of hands-on a deal with the civil rights movement.
Cecil has other objects in that museum that I didn't know he had gathered. For example, he has Thurgood Marshall's suitcase, the one that he traveled from New York to South Carolina and all those trips that he came down in during the 40s and early 50s. He has the vehicle that belonged to Reverend J.A. Delane that he had to leave South Carolina in. He has one of Reverend J.A. Delane's shotguns. He has the Bibles of the Briggs family and the Pearson family out of Clarendon County, those folk who really put their lives on the line when they signed the petition on the dotted line to start the Briggs versus Elliott case. So he's been able to collect all of those objects as well. So when I say nobody in South Carolina, no museum can compare to that from a civil rights standpoint, from a Black history standpoint, is Cecil Rights Museum.
Cecil has a front row seat to history, and his perspective is unique because he's the only one who sat in his seat.
The other important piece about the Cecil Williams Museum is the Cecil Williams Museum has Cecil Williams. So often a photographer's collection sits in an archive. It may become part of an exhibit. It may become part of a documentary program, but you don't have the photographer chronicling and narrating what has happened. And so what is unique about the Cecil Williams Museum is that young men and women, tourists, can come into this space and they can see an image and they can turn to the photographer who can narrate the broader context of that image. And so that's a unique gift that we have that other places can't claim.
I think it's just amazing what he's done with his Civil Rights Museum. It's amazing what he's done to come up with innovative ways to digitize the work that he's done. That's just Cecil. It's been who he is the entire time, a person who had an eye for the future while capturing the present. I just think when you look at South Carolinians, Cecil Williams is one of the most remarkable South Carolinians that we produced. He's a person who was made for that time period. I just think about what we wouldn't have if he hadn't captured what he did capture. Cecil is really a Renaissance man, that when you had Cecil there capturing that moment, you had an extraordinary person capturing extraordinary events.
He's a kind, gentle giant. He's the type of person that if you can't contribute positively, then he would rather you not be a part of whatever it is that he's trying to do.
To have him and have the many organizations that see his value recognize him while he's living really warms my heart and makes me very grateful, and I'm very happy that he can experience that.
Cecil's legacy is his struggle to tell the rest of the story. The story is what civil rights has done for African Americans, but behind that, the little people, the quiet heroes, students, people who didn't have food on their tables, people who marched out there. So I believe Cecil's legacy is his uplifting of those quiet heroes.
I think I'd like to be known as an explorer. Come to think of it, that might just kind of put everything in a nutshell, that I'm an explorer of life.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Janie Harriet, and I am the director for development and programs at the Cecil Williams Civil Rights Museum. I get to talk to this giant every day. It is indeed my pleasure to be here with you all this evening and to thank you all for coming to help us celebrate the great man that I get to see every day, Cecil Williams. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Bobby Donaldson and the Center for Civil Rights at the University of South Carolina for partnering to bring this event that is also sponsored by SC Humanities. I'd like to also thank the museum for offering us this beautiful space for you to gather in this evening, and to thank the Cecil Williams South Carolina Civil Rights staff, who are just volunteers, and they're in the back helping us. I'd also like to do an acknowledgement that only Cecil and I know about. Beryl Darkers, who helped produce this film, had a birthday. So Cecil and I would like to acknowledge her birthday by giving her a plaque on Briggs versus Elliott, Briggs before and beyond Brown. Where are you, Beryl? Happy belated. Please take this. Yes, we're going to have your name engraved on it. Okay. You heard all these wonderful things in the film about the museum. If you have not been there, this film does not tell the real story. Every time I walk in the museum, I see something different, I feel something different, I get to hear another story. And as Dr. Donaldson said, what many museums don't have is a Cecil Williams. It's his museum, it's his work, it's his photographer. And he quite often says, and as I say to him a lot, Cecil was on the front row. He was an eyewitness to many of these events. So my plea to you this evening, please support the museum. The museum is run by Cecil. The funding for the museum is all private funding. We get funding for educational programs, but the operation of the museum is all private funding. The state of South Carolina did give us some funding last year. The other thing I'd like for you to do is to talk to your legislators. South Carolina was the only state, a southern state, without a civil rights museum. Now you have one. As Dr. Donaldson said in the film, in Mississippi, the Civil Rights Museum is funded and operated by the state. It is beautiful. I was there 2 months ago. It does not compare to what we have in down at Cecil's Museum. The other thing is that Congressman Clyburn has worked with the museum in the city of Orangeburg and the county of Orangeburg. The museum will be moving from its current location to the railroad corner, downtown Orangeburg. We intend for that to be a draw for people coming off I-26. We want everybody coming on I-26 to stop in at the museum. Thank you, each of you. Have a great evening. Support the museum. Thank you.
So I'm going to stand on stage. I was told the people online cannot see us in the corner. And also, if you have seats next to you, would you just raise your hand? We have colleagues standing in the back. Please come forward and have a seat. I'm Bobby Donaldson. I'm a professor of history and executive director of the Center for Civil Rights History and Research. And I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedule to be here tonight to celebrate our icon, the monumental figure, Cecil Williams. Tonight is really about the intersection. So Joel mentioned the exhibit we have on the main level. And for the last 2 or 3 years, people have talked to us about, well, Bobby, we should have a program recognizing all of Cecil's major publications. Well, Bobby, we should have a program about this extraordinary documentary, The World of Cecil, and you've seen only 30 minutes of a 2-hour piece. Well, Bobby, we should bring Cecil to see the exhibit downstairs, where many of his photographs are on display. And Bobby, we should have an event, a big event at the Museum of Art celebrating Injustice in Focus, the latest publication by Cecil Williams and Claudia Smith Brinson. Well, tonight is the intersection of all of those ideas. And so I want to introduce our panelists as they come forward. So Cecil Williams is Cecil Williams. And I just want to offer one, I do it regularly, but Cecil, you know when he was born, for 70 years, he has been doing what he's doing. And there's a quote we use often in the Civil Rights Center by the great historian and activist Mary McLeod Bethune, who in 1937 almost prophetically saw Cecil coming down the road. She said this: if our people are to fight their way out of bondage, we need to arm them with a sword and a shield, a belief in themselves and their possibilities. We need to teach them their history from the cradle to the grave, and do so at whatever cost, even if it breaks the back of the kingdom. Cecil Williams, at whatever cost. I'm also very pleased to invite Claudia Smith Brinson, who has worked as a journalist for more than 30 years across the world. She was a national columnist at Knight Ridder and later worked for the state newspaper. From 2006 to 2016, she taught writing, literature, and media courses at Columbia College. Her first book, which I think is also here tonight, Stories of Struggle, was published by the USC Press in 2020, and her most recent book, co-authored by Cecil Williams, is Injustice in Focus, the Civil Rights Photography of Cecil Williams, published earlier this year. Please join me in welcoming Claudia. And I also would like to invite Beryl Darkers, who is one of the first African-American on-air news reporters, a highly decorated journalist. She is the director
of Cultural Programming and Outreach at South Carolina ETV. She has produced a number of documentaries, including Making Your Way Out of Nowhere, Strom Thurmond at the Seat of Power, and of course, The World of Cecil. She is also the president of the South Caroliniana Society. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Beryl Darkers. And then finally, I would like to invite Dr. Frank Martin, who is a visiting associate professor of art, history, and art theory at South Carolina State University. He is a retired director of the IP Standback Museum. He is a former lecturer and associate manager at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he has served as an academic advisor for PBS documentaries and also for the Charleston Post and Courier. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Frank Martin. Regrettably, Crush Rush, one of our ambassadors, is unable to be here, and he sends his regrets, but we will be looking for another program to bring him back to the stage.
He looks very officious, doesn't he?
When I was young, I could remember all my questions, but I have to use technical devices now, so all these questions are on my computer, which I'm probably going to waste water on. But thank you all for coming and welcome. And I know you're wondering, why on earth is Frank Martin moderating when Beryl Darkers, a legend in South Carolina educational television and one of the state's most well-known moderators, is sitting right next to him. And I have an ace up my sleeve. This was Cecil's first exhibition in South Carolina. This is Quiet Heroes. Dr. Twiggs kept saying he preserves the quiet heroes, the quiet heroes. It's a tribute to the exhibition we did at the Standback Museum. And the image that caused me to give it this title was the Ellery Training School, because some of you may know Vivian Glover. She works with NBC News. She's at the Orangeburg Art Center now. But her teacher, who also was named Vivian, was one of the teachers who resigned and was in that photograph, and they resigned to protect each other. And that's when I understood exactly what Cecil was doing when he was preserving this legacy and this history. Because who would have known? Who would have known the sacrifices that these ordinary citizens made without Cecil's documentation? So I'd like to give a big thank you to Dr. Donaldson, because there's some pictures showing, some of them from a PowerPoint we did with the South Carolina Association of Historians of Local History. And he was the keynote speaker. And he invited me because I was looking at some of the ways in which artists document civil rights. And so Cecil is the epitome of how artists help transform society by participating in civil rights activities. And Luther Baptiste kept saying, you know, Cecil's a futurist, Cecil's a futurist. I thought that too when I met him. They showed you, I think it's the Clark House, Cecil, that was in the Clark House, Mrs. Belcher's home in Orangeburg, and Stefan Edwards. So Cecil pretends he's not an architect. Cecil is an architect. He's a polymath. He's an autodidact. He is all these wonderful and extraordinary things. So I'm going to ask my first question of Cecil. And then since we saw the wonderful film, I'll move to Beryl. And then we'll ask Claudia to join in before we adjourn to the books, because Claudia will be the introduction to the signings that will happen afterwards. But Cecil, would you talk briefly about the inspiration for, because you have it in this wonderful publication, you have a mission statement. Would you talk briefly about your rationale for the founding of the museum in Orangeburg? Why did you think it had to be in Orangeburg? Why is it so important to talk about these quiet heroes?
Well, first of all, let me say that I can't go one bit towards answering that question without first thanking everyone in here for being present.
It really is great to have an audience such as you, and I'm very pleased that you've come out tonight. So thank you very much, each and every one of you. I guess we are all born with destinies, and I believe that I may embody personally those things that I do and have done, but sometimes it's just, it's going to be your destiny that these things occur where, and it's not always completely under your control. But looking at the struggles that happen in the state of South Carolina, as a young man growing up, I would scratch my head and wonder why when historians and news media would always talk about other places all over the United States where things were happening that were beginning to change and modify our history to make America a better place for everyone. And as I read about these things and realized that in South Carolina, we did these things, many things that caused these changes earlier, and yet it didn't make the history books. I just couldn't understand it. So I guess I was impelled, I was motivated. It was something I couldn't shake to try and publicize things that were going on, use my photographs. And so that's why I started publishing books as a means, because when you publish a book, it goes beyond just an ordinary, a single album or an exhibit, because many people will get to see your books. And when it came along with the opportunity to have a book written by one of America's greatest authors, Claudia Brinson, it was irresistible. And to be published by the University of South Carolina Press, it was irresistible. I could not. I've done books myself, and those were my photographic books, but to have a great American author, it was something that, again, I became so very proud that my work was going to have a greater audience. It would be known throughout, and it's a tribute to not just me as the photographer, but also to South Carolinians and the great roles that we played to help modify and tweak the 14th Amendment and the United States Constitution, because that's what, in effect, we did here in South Carolina a long time before the better-known persons that are largely given the credit for it.
So I have to steal some of this. Is all? Hello? Yes. I have to steal a little bit of Cecil's thunder because I have to shout it to my homeboy from Sumter, E.C. Jones, because E.C. was Cecil's mentor. And E.C. had Majestic Studios in Sumter, and one of the first things that struck me was the photograph that you had preserved by E.C. of the Liberty Hill AME Church with the sounders of the Briggs versus Elliott petition. And I saw in that photograph Jessica Simpkins, S.J. McDonald, Reverend Hinton, Eugene Montgomery from Orangeburg, who had the insurance business there. And again, ordinary citizens, but people who were developing strategies, who were working behind the scenes. That's not the one, the photographs are floating behind us. But these are the people who are doing the intellectual work, and of course Reverend J. Delane, whom Reverend Hinton had inspired to seek out the creation of the petition for the Briggs versus Elliott, but also Levi Pearson. I learned about Levi Pearson at Cecil's studio, listening to his stories. So would you just give us a quick overview of some of these contributions, and then, Thurgood Marshall coming to town, you taking his photograph when he arrived in Charleston. Just talk a little bit about how extraordinary those experiences were.
Well, again, I got involved very early as a photographer, and it became, okay?
It's
very
on,
early as a
close,
photographer.
yeah.
And it became my way of capturing things better than I was able to draw with a pencil and a piece of paper. And at 12 and 13 and 14, becoming involving in what is I think one of the most extraordinary stories of courage in South Carolina with people in Clarendon County. Clarendon County, by the way, is, or Somerton, the town of Somerton and Orangeburg, about 30 miles apart. And through my mother and E.C. Jones, who helped to arrange the photograph that you previously had, he got me involved in the people of Clarendon County and the people in Somerton who were really the petitioners who signed the first petition in history that called for the schools to be opened up, and the first case in history to attack segregation in public education. So I've always thought of myself as a storyteller, and we tell these stories, and it's about the only way to keep us as human beings from really doing the wrong thing all over again. It also helps to establish values. And so when Claudia and the book that she did, this opportunity, it helps to tell those stories. And Beryl and I, with the movie that you just previewed, we started working on that 4 or 5 years ago, and the dedication and the attention she made to things. But that will be a video and a production that will be around after our lives. It will be something that will be something to be viewed by future generations. But the people of Clarendon County, to specifically answer your question, some of the bravest people in the world, because it was the people in Clarendon, in Somerton, South Carolina, again, who started that first case that led to Brown versus Board of Education. And I'm working today to even make that case really become more a part of what is called Brown versus Board of Education. We were first, chronologically, we were first alphabetically with that case. And for it to be taken away and stolen itself is a hijacking of our history that shouldn't have happened. But through media people, like you see on this stage, I think we're going to be able to change that in the future. If something is something that is wrong in history comes to light, I think it's up to us to try and correct that history. I'll take apart from what the Reverend Martin Luther King said, and it was one of the great bits of philosophy he once said. He said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of sums up, again, some of what the people in Clarendon County and their contributions to history.
So to bring Beryl into the conversation, because I was going to ask you, Beryl, because when I look at Cecil's work, I see both art and journalism, and you're a journalist. And in how he structures some of the photographs, particularly striking for me was the tactical evasion in Orangeburg, where they've removed all of the seats so that people cannot sit in proximity. Or when you see something like the Williamsburg County schoolroom, which is a library with church pews, showing the devastation of the decimation of the character of what young African-American students had to learn. What made you decide this was the time to bring this film forward? Because I know the editing, the selecting, the choosing, the work that has to go into this. Why now with Cecil's work?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I wanted to do it years ago. And now, because we finally had the opportunity, you know, people think that things like this just happen, but they cost money. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, even in public television, they tell you, well, you got to find the money first. So when we were able to finally get a grant, it was an opportune time because Cecil himself was on a mission. And his mission was not just to establish his museum, but he was going around sharing his photos. And he had created this wonderful gadget which allowed him to digitize photos. And when he says he has hundreds of thousands of photos, he has hundreds of thousands of photos. And they were actually just dissolving because of age. And so he created this, what is your gadget?
It's a Crispit. The Christopher?
The film toaster. The film toaster. And so, you know, I saw Cecil appearing somewhere, and then I saw him appearing somewhere else, and I go back and I go, folks, we've got to capture this, because despite the boyish looks and the indefatigable energy that he has, Cecil is an octogenarian, and we needed to be able to capture him at this time, so that was very important.
Well, Cecil's so vital. He'll always be. Cecil's also a vegetarian, I should tell you.
Yes, he is.
He's been looking to the future for a long time.
A pescatarian.
A pescatarian, fish.
Yes.
But if we can sneak Claudia into the conversation too. So.
But I want to say something before you do that, because you asked him about the photos and how he felt. And I think probably the most iconic photo I can think of that really captures his introduction to civil rights, even though it was after he had started photographing the people in Clarendon County, is the one of Thurgood Marshall getting off the train.
Yes.
And that was done when you were how old?
14 years old.
Now, tell them how you felt about going down there. Had you any idea that you were actually capturing history at that point?
Not in the middle of the moment, the opportunity, and when the attorney that took me to Charleston to photograph him asked my parents to take me there. Having a camera back in the days we were talking about, this is the early part of the 1950s. Wasn't quite as common as the miracle developments we have today in things like the cell phone and cameras. And it wasn't everyone in every community that had a camera. And I had a little bit better than an ordinary camera. At 14 years old, I had a camera that cost about $50, and coming a step up from the $2.50 camera that we would have had. And so, but to answer your question, I have no idea of the greatness of the person that I was photographing. Here was a person that went on to so much shape the history and the legacy of not only the state of South Carolina, and not only someone who helped to do all kinds of things with achieving freedom, justice, and equality in America, but Thurgood Marshall, a larger-than-life attorney who, by the way, a lot of times worked without even being paid. But he'd come down from New York, and here he was arriving in Charleston, South Carolina, to be engaged with the case called Briggs versus Elliott, which came out of Somerton, South Carolina, and started by people who largely did not have more than a 10th grade education. Nevertheless, they came up with this case where they really just wanted better schools for their children.
Now, you also would travel with Reverend Ida Quincy Newman around the state, because he was the field secretary for the NAACP, to document the inequities that would help to argue those cases that Thurgood Marshall was bringing for why separate was always unequal. So could you talk a little bit about, because you were already a professional photographer and a stringer for Jet Magazine by 14? 12? 14? 14. And maybe that connection was also why you got national coverage, because Cecil, as I said, is a futurist, and Cecil had designed those houses in Orangeburg with solar panels, and the Clark house is still there. Still, the Clark family is living there, I think. And I went through that house, and I saw all these features that Cecil had with, the way he laid out the design, and it's just an extraordinary, it's a phenomenon. And I looked at Cecil completely differently after that, and he also designed his museum and what I call the Barbara Williams house, which his wife Barbara is here. That is the most extraordinary of, I think, all the ones that he did do. So, but to bring Claudia in, so Claudia, what was it that brought Cecil to your attention? Why did you think that this was the time for your book? And talk about the title, what is it? Injustice in Focus.
I was a state newspaper reporter back when it was a newspaper. And I had a big portfolio, and I had the opportunity to travel all around the state writing about particular social issues. And as I did that, I met a lot of very, very wonderful Black elders, people that I truly think of as the great heroes that I have met in my life, true heroes, unknown, as Cecil and Beryl have both pointed out. And I, like Cecil, developed a mission. And that mission was that it was just absolutely wrong that these stories of what extraordinary courage these people had and the things that they did to create and preserve a true democracy for their children, not for themselves. They knew they wouldn't profit. It was just wrong that we didn't know these stories, and it was also, to me, very wrong that South Carolina had created this mythology of being a moderate state. It was not a moderate state. The segregation was cruel and vindictive. And so it became my mission to interview as many people as I possibly could. And along the way, I started calling Cecil, who is so gracious and kind, and I would ask him to explain things to me or to suggest someone else that I could talk to. And so we became people who were helping each other out, because as he was doing the books that he was writing, he would call me up and ask about a felicitous phrase or two, or a title for a book, right? So we became compadres, I guess you could say, in this mission, although he is far, far ahead of me, of trying to tell maybe not a true history because so much is lost, but a truer history. And I could do that through words, and along the way it became just something that had to be done to merge his photographs with his stories. And so when that opportunity came up, I was actually working on another book, but when that opportunity came up, I was like, yes, I want to do this. And COVID came along, and that was actually sort of serendipitous because Cecil was at home. He's someone who is gone all the time, spreading the word. And because we were both at home and there was Zoom, we would have 2.5-hour interviews twice a week. And first establishing his story, and then me pestering him about, was that a baby brownie or a baby brownie special, right? Were you 12 or 13 when you met Thurgood Marshall, because he was here in this year, not that year? What about John F. Kennedy? Had he actually announced or not? I can't find that in his papers. I was very annoying, which is what a reporter learns to do. And so it was just felt so much a privilege to be able to write about someone like Cecil, who had dedicated his life to preserving, through the documentary aspect of photography, a truer story of what was going on in South Carolina. And I know you're going to do this at the end, but I just feel compelled right now to say, let's give him a round of applause for existing,
So with Cecil, there was also some personal sacrifice in terms of, tell us about the college scholarship you had to sacrifice because of, I guess, the machinations around Bennett Turner. Now, if you don't know who Bennett Turner is, Bennett Turner had come to Orangeburg, South Carolina from Harvard University to run the law school that had been established around John Wrighton. Cecil, do you want to fill in from there and then kind of tell why you didn't get to go to South Carolina State and ended up going to Claflin and working with Arthur Rose?
Well, living in Orangeburg, we have two great universities side by side, Claflin University and South Carolina State. And but because there were some courses at State College that I wanted to take, when I was in 11th grade, my advisor at Wilkinson High School tried to get me into Clemson, but they would not even send the application blank back for me to even apply. So I began focusing my attention to maybe State or Claflin. As it turned out, because in 11th grade, I was taking pictures for the State College yearbook to assist E.C. Jones, the photographer out of Sumter. State College offered me a free tuition, completely everything, and gave me a stipend And, but then a funny thing happened along that way. In the summer of 1955,
Fred Moore.
Fred Moore, and by the way, this is 4 months before the Montgomery bus boycott. A situation happened in Orangeburg where parents were involved in petitioning, marching, and demonstrating against segregation.
I think it was
And
the Sunbeam Bread
a
Company.
boycott developed involving boycotting like things like Sunbeam Bread, Coca-Cola. And when I took pictures that appeared in Jet magazine, even though I had this fully paid scholarship at State College, President B.C. Turner, again, rescinded on my scholarship. President Manning at Claflin heard about this, and he offered me a scholarship, and I went to Claflin University.
Now, to contextualize, South Carolina State was funded through the state of South Carolina. And Benno Turner was not his own person. So he probably was instructed not to let this young upstart be there doing that. So politics did affect you. You had to make some sacrifices, but you got to study with Arthur Rose, who was also a civil rights leader in Orangeburg, who signed the petition for the integration of the schools in Orangeburg. Beryl, you had something you wanted to say.
Well, I was going to say it got very complicated, and this is one of the problems. I'm sure Claudia will agree with me. When you try to document Cecil's life, because there are all these interconnected things and events going on, and to single it out like that becomes difficult. But I think with the South Carolina State case, it also had to do with the fact that the students joined in to the boycott.
Right.
And Benner C. Turner
Wanted them to be safe.
well, it wasn't so much that he wanted them to be safe, but they were boycotting. The mayor owned Paradise Ice Cream and some of these
And Sunbeam Bread
places
was-
that they were boycotting, and other essential folks who were contractees for State College and suppliers
They were
of
losing
goods and
money.
things that sort. And he said, you can't boycott these people. We're not going to allow this boycott. And the students said, yes, we will.
And the students did.
Yeah, and they did.
And it was one of the most effective boycotts, I think, conducted at that time. And it was before the sit-ins. It was before things had happened in Greensboro and other places. This was in Orangeburg, and this is the kind of thing that Cecil preserves and that Cecil was talking about.
And I think that was the Orangeburg Freedom Movement. One of the things that I'm going to do shameless self-promotion about is please don't think that the excerpt that you saw tonight tells the whole story, because there really are, those are not contiguous pieces that have been welded together. But Cecil's story is so tied up with the actual social and civil rights history of our state that there are so many things that we don't know. We are not aware of all of these movements in which South Carolina was the prime instigator or the prime place where things happened that influenced history all across our country.
We were sending people out to train people in other states.
We were doing all sorts of things,
Yeah.
but also the major civil rights cases that came about that allowed us to protest publicly, things of that nature we don't know about. So please watch the documentary, pull it up. It's on ETV online. It's a 2-hour documentary. It's not, and it does not nearly capture everything.
No.
I'm going to say one other thing to you, because Frank held this up at the beginning. I have to tell you that I have footage of Quiet Heroes. It was going to be in the documentary along with a million other things. And at some point, you just had to go, okay, we can't do everything.
Oh, the exhibition at Steinbeck. You had that footage? Beryl, was it Verve? Was that the show you used to do?
It was either Verve or Arts the
Or
Thing.
Arts, yes. Well, we've all known each other far too long. But yeah, when Quiet Heroes was up, I do remember you came down to the state and you documented Cecil's work there. So we're getting a 10-minute warning since we have to open this up to the audience because you should have an opportunity to ask a few of these questions.
Dr. Martin, I would like to make one point before we open it up, which is how rare and special Cecil is. Now, you have a feeling for this because of Beryl's wonderful documentary, but I want you to know that there were very, very few black civil rights photographers. Photojournalism was dangerous during the movement. L. Alex Wilson, who was a black photographer that went to the Central High School desegregation for the Tri-County Defender, was attacked and so brutally injured that he died 3 years later of neurological problems. I could go on and on. You had a big camera around your neck. People would grab the camera and sling you with it. If you were holding the camera, there are several instances, another person who died, where the camera was used as a weapon to beat you over the head with. It was high risk. You were obviously a photojournalist because of your camera, and if you had black skin, you were obviously someone there to tell a story that the white segregationists did not want told. And you've seen a picture go by that Cecil took of a white man barring the door to two black, well-dressed young people. That's a church. And I'm hoping that Cecil would tell you the story about what happened to him after he took that picture. It was the mayor, and the mayor said, "You can't come in." And Dorothy Van said it was a beautiful church. They had hoped they might worship together. And he said, "Go worship with your own kind." And Cecil was on the sidewalk taking the photograph. It ran all over the world because he did get circulation through the Associated Press. And what happened, Cecil?
Well, after I took that picture of the mayor of Orangeburg refusing two students' entrance into a church. Now imagine this now here at the church representing, Christianity and the difficulty in trying to comprehend segregation based on race and color, things like that. But anyway, here the mayor who attended that church coming to the door and refusing them. And I took the picture. I sold it to the Associated Press. And then after the picture went around the world, about a month later, the draft board in Orangeburg called me up. And I knew it was connected because when I went to their office on Summer Street, the building is still there today. Dr. Atkinson, my good friend, who is also a great historian sitting in the audience there, knows. I went into that office. I knew it was connected because as they pulled my folder from a file cabinet, the cutout from the newspaper, did one of these. And since this may be the last minute I have the microphone, I want to also thank Dr. Bobby Donaldson.
Yes.
I don't know where you know it, but Dr. Donaldson is not of South Carolina, I don't think. He come from over Augusta.
He's a
Georgian. But for him to come to South Carolina and help to put this state on the map, I can't go anymore.
Yes.
Thank you.
I want to add here that Cecil did not want to go to Vietnam, so he volunteered to the Air Force. He was accepted, and this meant that he had to say goodbye to his photo studio. So they still altered his life. When he was in training, there was a fire drill, and a portly co-soldier fell down the stairs behind Cecil and knocked him all the way down the stairs. And Cecil did end up in the hospital, but it also got him out of the Air Force. And he came back and opened his studio again. So there was a cost. There was a cost to this bravery.
So Cecil is
Freedom
lucky
is not
unlucky.
free.
Well, right now that photograph is up by Rendell Harper. Cecil should tell that story, and I use that story. I use this image as Cecil.
And this is something my mother had warned me about. You see, there were laws in the state of South Carolina against many things, including separate schools. But there are some things in individual communities that you were taboo. You were taught by your parents who had struggled with accommodating segregation during their time. And here we were coming along as a new generation who we were challenging. But this is something my mother had warned me, to be very careful because it was some dangerous times. And but on my way back from an assignment, I went to the, I think Huntington Island to photograph Reverend I. D. Quincy Newman, who was going to stick his foot in the Atlantic Ocean to defy South Carolina's ban on people of color going to our public beaches. But it was a non-event, and being that it was a time and period when cell phones are not available, the event didn't happen. So on my way back, my friend Reno Harper, who was in the car with me, we got thirsty. You couldn't go into a store doing this particular time. I was about 18 years old. You couldn't go into a store and just buy water from, a drink fountain. And I got thirsty, and I pulled into the service station, and all this took place in about 1 minute. But there was a man in the repair bay, and there was a man pumping gas. And I got out of my car, and I drank that water, and Reno photographed me. And then when I got back in the car, Reno got out, and he did the same thing, and I photographed him. And Charles McClary, don't know whether he's not, but he's a Columbia photographer. When I did my book, Out of the Box in Dixie, which Claudia, by the way, helped me to name, because I would bug her to try to, I said, how does this name sound? And anyway, I would bounce my name, the titles off of books I did. And anyway, but when that picture appeared in Out of the Box in Dixie, Charles McClary photographed it and sent it to the new and emerging social media. And it started going around social media. But anyway, my mother chewed me out when I did this. That was a no-no.
Well, I think that we have to open this up to the audience now for some questions, because, I think I saw Bill Barley in the audience earlier. Dean Atkinson's here. Who else is over there? There's Bill over here. Bill was another photographer during the period of the Orangeburg Massacre in particular, and has known Cecil, he was telling me, for 56 years. Yeah, so stand up, Bill, just for us. I don't know who else might be here. There's so many people here. So many luminaries here. I don't know if there are any people who were who were at the Orangeburg Massacre maybe were here. But are there any questions for Cecil from our audience, or for Beryl, or for Claudia? Yes?
First, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Williams, for what you've done. And to the audience, I have visited the museum. I was there for about 2.5 hours, and I need to go back so I can see everything. It's awesome. What was your experience? Oh, thank you. What was your experience with the Black Power component of the civil rights movement that arose, I guess, from some of the younger people? And could you walk us through that, please?
Did you have that picture of Stokely Carmichael in there? Kwame Ture.
You had all kinds of movements and actions and things affecting, you might say, the black struggle, the struggle for freedom, justice, equality. And some individuals felt that the court system from which the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, again, with his philosophy of nonviolence and the peaceful movement, that things were a little too slow. There were some who were fed up with, we had been living in this country for 400 years and been trying to achieve freedom, justice, and equality. And so some sought more violent means, but all of these things happening, when you look back into history, were part of the effort, and all of them, I think, helped, because you had those that might have wanted to do things more violently, contrast against people who want to do things peacefully. So, but all were contributing factors to making this country the wonderful democracy that we are today. Not yet perfect, but still yet the wonderful democracy that we are, which is very rare. And a democracy is very fragile, as we have come to learn here in recent years. But I think the Black Power and the individuals, they were really genuinely interested in wanting to do something because they reached a point of frustration doing things maybe slower ways. And I can understand it very well because I myself got very frustrated once being arrested by 2 highway patrolmen and placed in a highway patrol car. And they took my film out of the camera and they threw my new Hasselblad camera in the trunk of their car. And while I was in the front seat and the 2 highway patrolmen walked away to go and arrest others, I did something that I should not have done. I pulled all the wires out of the back of their motor. And so, but we were told again, we were involved in a march, a demonstration, not to react. If somebody tripped you up, you weren't supposed to retaliate. If somebody spat on you, you weren't supposed to. You had to be dedicated to doing things peacefully. But all of these things will help to, again, tweak our 14th Amendment in the Constitution to get America to be able to live out its promise that we are all created equal.
Hi.
Yes.
I'll pass it this way. My name is Tiara Dungy. I'm a PhD student over at Carolina in the College of Education. I'm nearly 40, so it might be a question that's a little bit late for me, but I have a bunch of siblings down to the age of 4, and they take the most powerful photos with that supercomputer in their pockets, like literally down to the 7-year-old. It's been fascinating to learn about how young you were when you changed the world. And now that we have these pictures and we have these stories, they're still in black and white. And when I speak to my 10-year-old siblings, my 8-year-old siblings that have the power to take these kind of photos, do you have any advice for young people that want to make a social change but may not have that hook yet of this needs to be done? People that have the power but don't necessarily have the same spotlight on the goal like you did.
That's for me.
Yes.
Well,
You're the artist.
well, thank you very much. You're right. The miracle we have that we have here in the digital world changes photography. If you can imagine, back during the days when I was a photographer, having to, after you took the picture with film, you had to develop the film and then develop the picture, and to have the immediacy of digital technology where you see what you have captured right on the spot. But I would have to say that I'm both very, very pleased. I would never go back to those days of being in the dark room, but it's almost like you might say this tale of two cities, something out of that novel that I've read that was the very best of times and very worst of times. But photography, in a way, the golden days of being a working journalist are much, much more complicated today, and it's overcrowded, wherein everybody now is a photographer. So they're not the opportunities that are out there for maybe future journalists and future Beryl Darkers and future Claudia Brimsons and the future Bobby Donaldsons and all of us who capture, and Dr. Frank Martin, and he has not said that, but I don't know whether you know about Dr. Frank Martin was the curator and person responsible for the Stand-Back Museum in Orangeburg at State College. But all of the opportunities we've had, it's much more competitive out there today, and I would give this advice to the youth coming up. Today, you need to maybe concentrate on producing content because of the possibilities now where you can have a broadcast on social media and you reach millions of people at one time, or filmmaking, telling these stories. I think there will always be an opportunity. In fact, there's more opportunities now. Netflix and all the other ways we have of telling stories today. And it's become an information pack. So in that way, it's the best of worlds for youth. But you've got to learn how to create content that is storytelling. So I would advise the youth of today to, again, don't try to repeat the same kinds of things that we did in our day, but produce whatever you're doing, photography, video, motion pictures, whatever, content, storytelling.
See, if I'd had any more time, I would follow up with this, because Cecil's a futurist. He's telling young people the way forward is to do your podcast, to develop content, to probably concentrate more on filmmaking. But we don't have any more time. So, but thank you so much. We do have closing remarks from Dr. Bobby Donaldson, wherever he is. He was responsible for organizing this panel. I'm so sorry Crush Rush wasn't here, because Crush Rush was the clue to the future generation. And I was going to ask Cecil about whether he saw the Black Lives Matter and the demonstrations that are going on now by students as part of this legacy of civil rights, but we won't do that this time. And I hand this over to Dr. Donaldson. Yes.
We'll do that next time. So
Next
we'll
time.
keep you abreast of other events. There are several people watching online, including my mother. And she just texted me. She said, you all need to establish a comic book and make Cecil a superhero. Now, this is not planned. My mother does not know that the Civil Rights Center just created a bookmark with Cecil Williams' photograph on it, and it says this: we talk about superheroes like Superman or the Black Panther, but I wish young people would realize there are superheroes in their neighborhood who fought injustice every day. So I want to thank my mother for giving my closing remarks tonight. And I especially would like to thank Claudia Smith Brinson, Beryl Darkers, Frank Martin, and the remarkable Cecil J. Williams. As I indicated, this has been an intersection. There are books to be purchased and signed by the USC Press and All Good Books, also by the Cecil Williams Museum. Chef Andre has prepared an extraordinary reception for you. And also, please visit the gallery downstairs for intersection. At a future time, take the Columbia 63 walking tour down Main Street, and you'll also see other images by Cecil Williams. So please join me once again in thanking this extraordinary panel this evening. And also, there are surveys at the CRC table along with a display of Mr. Williams' photographs.